How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. The CFL draft is right around the corner. It's going to be next Tuesday, May the 4th, if I'm getting my dates correct here. And in honor of this, today we're going to be looking at the biggest draft steal from each of the past 10 CFL drafts. But really quickly before we get started, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting that like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. You can also help the video out by sharing it with a friend, and I would appreciate each and every one of your support for doing that. And with that said, let's get started. So before we dive in, let's go over some qualifiers for what I'm going to be basing my selections on, the criteria of what meets a draft steal. You know, we're not going to include the 2020 draft for obvious reasons. We haven't seen anything to base their play on because of the canceled 2020 season. And the only other parameter I have is that it cannot be a first round pick, even though you could say some of the players in the back half of the opening round are sometimes steals. Just for simplicity's sake, we're just going to say that anybody that was selected beyond round 1 can be classified as a steal. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting in 2010, we have offensive lineman Ryan Bombin out of Guelph, originally taken in the 4th round with the 31st pick. There are plenty of choices for the 2010 draft, but ultimately I decided to go with Bombin, who in my opinion also had the best career of any player in this class. Bombin made 4 divisional all-star teams across 10 seasons with the Owls, Ticats, and Argos. But that being said, there were actually a lot of honorable mentions for this class that you easily could have went with as well. You have wide receiver Sean Gore, who was a 2nd round pick for the BC Lions. Pat Neufeld, who was, I believe, a 5th round pick, who's really developed into a very consistent offensive lineman in the CFL, despite some injury troubles throughout his career. And then you have Marc-Olivier Brulé, who, even though he had a really short career relative to a lot of players in this draft class, he had one of the highest peaks in this draft, and he deserves to be mentioned among the honorable mentions here in this draft. Moving on to 2011, and this is a draft we recently just talked about on the channel with the 2011 CFL redraft. But in this case, this should come as no surprise to anybody. We're going with wide receiver Brad Sinopoli out of Ottawa, who was originally taken in the 4th round, 29th overall in the draft. A trio of outstanding options here with Matt O'Donnell and Craig Butler also being selected outside of the 1st round. So we had quite a few options to choose from here. But I had to go with Sinopoli, who has been among the most prolific receivers in the CFL over his time in the league with both Calgary and Ottawa. 2 most outstanding Canadian awards for the receiver really made this a no-brainer selection. And like I said, the honorable mentions for this section are offensive lineman Matt O'Donnell, been one of the best players from this draft class, still in the league even though he's currently a free agent. And then you got DB Craig Butler, who was really, even though he's retired, had a relatively short career, he had one of the best peaks in this draft class, made multiple all-star teams, and deserves a mention here. Now moving on to 2012, and this is a draft I haven't covered yet in my redraft series, so from now on, in this point in the video, it's going to get a little more interesting. With this selection, we're going with defensive lineman Cleon Lang out of Iowa State, who was originally selected in the 2nd round with the 9th pick. Plenty of honorable mentions to shout out here in 2012. However, Lang, who was selected just outside of the 1st round, is easily the top choice. Lang has consistently been a high motor defensive tackle over his time in the league, and to date has 33 career sacks, including 7 in 2019 when he was named an All-Star. Not only is Lang my choice for the biggest draft steal in 2012, but he is also one of the most impactful Canadian players in the league today. Other options here include Brad Erdos, who was a very sturdy offensive lineman that had played many years with Calgary. Defensive lineman Jake Thomas, who has been a really consistent rotational defensive lineman, is really good as a spot starter during his time in Winnipeg. Still there, was a big part of that defensive line that was a big factor in that team winning the 2019 Grey Cup. And then Mike Filer, who was selected really late in this draft out of Mount Allison, and he's just really been a very good offensive lineman for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, even though they decided to move on this offseason. I believe Mike Filer is still unsigned, if I'm not mistaken. Moving on to 2013, we have offensive lineman Shane Bergman, who was selected in the 6th round with the 48th pick. 2013 had a couple of stellar steals. However, in terms of sheer value, there's no question that this selection had to go to Bergman, who is without a doubt one of the best CFL draft picks in recent memory. The Western lineman was picked by Calgary in the 6th round and played his entire career for the organization, becoming a staple along the offensive line for a powerhouse Stampeders team. Add in an All-Star appearance and 2 Grey Cup championships, and Bergman is easily the choice in this section. However, there are a couple honorable mentions that we have to go over here. We have Brett Jones, who was an absolute standout over a couple of CFL seasons, where he was named the CFL's most outstanding rookie as an offensive lineman, which is hella impressive. Honestly, those guys, offensive linemen, generally don't get recognition for awards like that, so he was dominant in the CFL to get recognition for that award. And he actually, after those first couple of seasons in the CFL, he ended up going to the NFL, where he's remained on rosters down there ever since, even started some games down there. And he just didn't have a long enough CFL career for me to consider him over Bergman in this case, even though he's really the better offensive lineman when you take general football into account if he had stayed up here in the CFL. In 2014, we have defensive lineman Derek Wigan out of Queens, who was selected in the 4th round with the 34th pick. Wigan really stands alone among his draft class among the players taken beyond the 1st round, as he has really developed into a very sturdy starter at defensive tackle for Calgary. Not a flashy player by any means, but Wigan has been a really good run defender that is capable of chipping in as a pass rusher on occasion. And considering the other options, there weren't really any other notable players that really developed into consistent CFL starters beyond the 1st round here. Mostly just guys that have stayed in the league, but they're not, they weren't impactful players. So Wigan is the clear choice here in 2014. Moving on to 2015, and this was a very difficult year to select. I think one of the hardest ones in this video. But we're going with defensive back Tavon Campbell out of Regina, who was selected in the 3rd round with the 22nd pick. For 2015, I settled on Campbell over a couple of other contenders. Campbell absolutely lit up the CFL Combine in 2015 with an event record 4.35 40-yard dash, but ultimately still ended up falling to Calgary in the 3rd round. While just glancing at his statistics won't blow you away, Campbell developed into a CFL starting caliber corner, a rarity for a Canadian player. His film over his 4 years in the CFL was enough to catch the attention of the Los Angeles Chargers of the NFL, who signed him to a contract in 2019. Eventually in 2020, Campbell fought his way onto the Chargers' active roster and even recorded his first interception and touchdown during a Week 11 game against the Jets. Pretty good for a former Regina Ram who really just broke onto the scene with that great combine performance and really worked his way up through the CFL and just earned his opportunity at every chance he got. The guys that I considered over Tavon Campbell were Lamar Durant and David Beard, who were both 2nd round picks in 2015. And Durant's been a really great receiver in the CFL over the past few years. He was really starting to emerge in that 2019 season with BC and was also a most outstanding Canadian in the Grey Cup game with Calgary a few years back. And then David Beard, I would argue in 2019 he was the best center in the Canadian Football League, but I want to see more of a sample size before I considered him over a guy like Campbell, who, even though maybe didn't have the biggest impact in the CFL, but was able to just showcase himself in a way that got him an NFL contract, and now he's actually seeing playing time in the National Football League, so that's why I'm going with Campbell in this case. Moving on to 2016, we have defensive back Taylor Loeffler out of UBC, who was selected in the 3rd round with the 19th pick. With all due respect to other choices, Loeffler is the easy selection for 2016. The former UBC and Boise State standout had an astonishing start to his CFL career, becoming one of a handful of players in league history to be named an All-Star in each of his first 3 seasons. However, since then, injuries have really taken a toll on the former star safety, with a torn ACL ending his 2019 season with Montreal. It will be interesting to see if any team picks up Loeffler in the lead up to the 2021 season. Regardless, his peak is higher than almost any Canadian player in recent memory, so he is the slam dunk choice here. That being said, there's some honorable mentions I do want to mention here that have become really solid CFL players. Michael Couture, who's a center for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He started all the games during the 2019 regular season, but broke his leg in the final game of that season and missed the Grey Cup run for Winnipeg, unfortunately. But he was really turning into a very solid player. I'm really excited to see what he can do when the league does resume. And then Juwan Brescacin, again, a guy that struggled with injury history, but when he's been on the field, he's shown a potential to be a dynamic receiver, some crazy highlight reel catches. And then the other guy I want to mention here is another receiver, and that's Shaq Johnson. People that have watched my show before know I love Shaq Johnson. I think he's one of the most underutilized receivers in the Canadian Football League. He has legit 4.4 speed. When he's been throwing the ball, like his target, the amount he produces for how much he's targeted has been pretty incredible over his time in the CFL over the first few seasons of his career, and I'm really excited to watch his development. Then moving on to 2017, we have defensive lineman Kwaku Boateng out of Wilfrid Laurier, who was selected in the 5th round with the 40th pick. I'm going to have to hand out some big honorable mentions for this 2017 class, but the ultimate decision here is easily Boateng, who developed into one of the league's best defensive ends, regardless of nationality. The former Golden Hawk already has 21 sacks across 3 CFL seasons since being drafted by Edmonton, and an all-star appearance is undoubtedly in his near future. Fun fact, 3 Down Nation was doing a lot of reporting earlier this offseason about the restructuring of player contracts, and it was stated somewhere on the site that Boateng is now the highest paid non-quarterback in the CFL. So that's the kind of player we are talking about here, folks. But the 2017 class does have some notable honorable mentions that went in the late rounds. We have Tunde Adeleke, who's become a starting safety with the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Calgary Stampeders. You have Jordan Herdman-Reed, whose brother Justin was also selected, but I figured I just mentioned Jordan here because he's proven himself more as a CFL player. He was selected very late in the draft, as was Boateng and Adeleke. And then finally, we have Sean Thomas Erlington, a running back out of Montreal, who was selected in the last round of the CFL draft, has really turned into a potential starter down the road here in the CFL, was really looking good at the beginning of the 2019 season for Hamilton, and then he suffered a season-ending injury. And moving on to 2018, now we're moving on to these draft classes that we haven't really seen a ton of film on these players to really gauge who's the biggest steal at this point in the draft, but I'm going to take my best stab at it of how these drafts are trending so far. My pick here for 2018 is defensive back Isaiah Gazilak-Messam out of Wilfrid Laurier, who was picked in the 4th round with the 34th pick. Really a 2-horse race in my opinion so far, but I decided to go with Gazilak-Messam by the slimmest of margins. After a slow rookie season in the league, the linebacker DB hybrid player really broke out during the 2019 season, recording 37 defensive tackles, 14 special teams tackles, and a sack. Just by the eye test, I think it's clear that Messam still has plenty of room to grow as he becomes more adjusted to diagnosing route combinations and zone coverage. Now here's a fact for you. Isaiah actually attended the same high school that I did, and I actually played high school football with his brother. So, small world after all, right? The other guy I considered over Gazilak-Messam was Royce Metchie. Very similar cases, but you're really splitting hairs between these two guys at this point because how little of a sample size we've seen. Metchie, again, like Messam, has established himself as a potential long-term starter in the Canadian Football League. Moving on to 2019, we have wide receiver Colton Hunchak out of York, who was selected in the 8th round, 73rd overall, and was actually the last pick in the 2019 draft. Not a ton to go off of here with just a single season of football under the belt of these prospects, but I'm going with Hunchak just based on that fact that this guy was the last pick in the 2019 draft and was already finding his way into quality on-field opportunities on a very good Stampeders team in his rookie season. That is pretty darn impressive, especially considering York hasn't exactly been a powerhouse at producing CFL talent over the years. We're going to see what Hunchak can do in the future for Calgary. They have a couple of good national receivers with Herji Mayala there and Richie Sindani, of course, still being around there. So it's going to be interesting to see how they work out that national receiver rotation in Calgary, but I'm just rambling on at this point. And with that said, that is going to be the end of today's video. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Once again, my name is Jason. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting that like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. Be sure to let me know in the comment section what player you would have selected as the biggest draft steal from every draft if you disagreed with one of my selections. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.